Our session today is part of the Manitoba Look North series, Investment Ready. And we have two presenters, and our first presenter will be Ruth Mealy, and she is an economic development specialist with the Department of Growth, Enterprise, and Trade. Ruth has been around the economic development field for over 20 years, and prior to this was a teacher and an entrepreneur. Ruth develops resources and programs for rural and northern communities and economic development practitioners. Our second presenter is Richard Pauls. He has worked directly in economic development, specializing in market research, analysis, and business information in Calgary and the region for over 27 years. As a partner at Integral Strategy, he brings deep experience in business systems design, community economic development strategy, technology planning and assessment, community assessment, and community mobilization and engagement to his clients.
Welcome everybody, and thank you for the introduction, Megan. As she mentioned, I work for the Department of Growth, Enterprise and Trade for the province of Manitoba, and I work in the Marketing and Sector Intelligence branch as an economic development specialist. My work involves developing resources for economic development agencies and practitioners. Primarily, that's what I do. And this handbook that we're featuring today is called A Guide for Attracting Business Investment to Your Community. And it was developed primarily because we were getting requests for this type of a resource and for information on a tracking handbook. The handbook itself is intended for any rural or northern community, and the intent is to help communities prepare for attracting business investment. The following topics are found within the handbook: the list of community characteristics that are attractive to business investors, some tips on preparing the community for investment. There's quite a bit of information on foreign direct investment, what it is, why it's important, different types of foreign direct investment or FDI. There's a section on site selectors and the site selection process. And at the end, there's a plug for business retention and expansion and things like economic gardening or providing resources for existing businesses in your community. The guide is not quite ready yet. It will be available in mid-December. So if you would like to email me, I would be more than happy to send you a copy as soon as I have one from the designers. So my email is ruth.mealy, M-E-A-L-Y, @gov.mb.ca. Okay, so again, as I mentioned before, communities have expressed interest in knowing how to attract business investment to their community, and the guide is intended to help communities of all sizes and wherever you're located with information and guidance on attracting business investment. So my big but is, before diving into investment attraction, communities should consider this 10-second lesson in economic development. Now, I went to the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation conference, the annual conference this fall in Nelson, BC, and I listened to a speaker, Katie Nolan from Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Initiatives, and she had a session for really small. It was called Doing Economic Development for Tiny Communities. And her main point was that for small communities, attracting business investment takes resources, takes time, it takes money, it takes people, and it's the riskiest economic development strategy out there. She provided this kind of hierarchy of economic development that I think is really important for communities of any size to remember. The riskiest type of economic development strategy is the business attraction strategy. So trying to entice businesses to move into your community. So it's the highest risk, highest cost. The best chance of success are the community development types of strategies, things like beautification, working with local community organizations to improve the community. Any of those types of strategies have the best chance of success and are the least cost. And in the middle is the business retention and expansion, which is the medium risk, medium cost. So just a little bit of a caution. Make sure that you understand your community and where it's at, the resources that are available to do business attraction before you dive right in. There's another researcher that I've read quite a bit of, and his is a bit longer lesson, but it's still a great read on economic development. And what I'm referring to in particular is a study done by David Freshwater, Alvin Sims, and Jamie Ward. They did a study called Functional Regions as a Structure for Enhancing Economic Development in Atlantic Canada. They did this research for the Harris Center at Memorial University back in 2013, but I think there's still some really important lessons to learn from that research. And what their research identified were different types of communities and the most appropriate economic development strategies and policies for each type. The bottom line in this research is for communities to choose strategies wisely, and business attraction may not be the first choice for small communities without export industries or without a solid economic base. So again, before you dive right into business attraction as a strategy for your community, make sure that you know that it's right for you. And my last word of caution, before choosing business investment as a strategy, according to EDAC, or the Economic Developers Association of Canada, 44% of all job growth in Canadian communities comes from new business startups. 55% of job growth comes from business expansions, and only 1% comes from businesses that move into a community. So economic development strategies that support entrepreneur startups and help businesses expand might provide the best bang for your buck. Now, that's not to say don't lose sight of trying to attract business investment, because it can be a real boom to communities. But when I'm talking about business attraction, I'd like you to think of it as encouraging business investment of any kind. So think of it as including startups and expansions, because I think a lot of the information that we found on attracting business investment is applicable for those types of strategies as well. So the first thing that we tackle in the handbook is what makes a community attractive to investors. And there's a long list, but I think these are probably the most common ones that we found in the research, that businesses are attracted to communities that have a highly educated workforce, where there's strong industry clusters, where there's regional economic strategies, that there's some type of a promotional agency to attract investment, where there's infrastructure and accessibility, where communities are investing in new technologies, and where there's incentives for foreign direct investment. So, but what makes a community attractive to investors is more and more about going to where the talent is. So people that are investing in communities are looking for communities that have talent, or the trained labor forces. Businesses are looking for quality of life for their employees, and more it's about information technology infrastructure. So making sure that there's good internet capabilities in a community is huge these days. So the next part of the handbook talks about, is your community ready for investment? And we've referred to a couple of online self-assessments, and you can Google these and go to them right away. There's a couple of assessments from Alberta and BC that are really quite good. But each of these investment assessments ask you to these types of questions. Do you have a main contact person? Is this person familiar with all of the approvals and planning processes in your community? Do you have a land use plan? And are your policies clear? Are they online? Are they available? So anybody looking to invest in your community, is it easy to find that information out? Does your community have an active business retention and expansion program? So first of all, before you're ready for investment, the theory is that you should also be trying to support your local businesses that you already have. Do you have an updated online industrial land inventory? And does your website have a downloadable copy of a community profile? So again, these are hints for communities at any stage of investment readiness. So to prepare for business investment, there's a bit of advice in the handbook. Develop a plan, first of all, and the plan should build on the strengths and also fill gaps. So building on the strengths means what is your competitive advantages so that you can understand what businesses and industries will complement the strengths. So what can your community support? What makes sense for your community? And then also looking at gaps. If you have some clusters, are there supply chain gaps within that cluster that you could use as targets for business investment? The third piece of advice is a regional approach. And we found that that research over and over again, the advice to work within a region. Because the assets within a region provide a really strong value proposition for people looking to invest in your region. And also it's more cost effective for all of the things that you want to do, whether it's marketing or going to trade shows, all those types of things. It's a little easier doing it on a regional basis. So if you think you're ready to attract investment, the next part of the handbook looks at some advice. Provide a professional person that is the single point of contact for your community. If I'm interested in investing in a community or even just finding out information about a community, you want to make sure that there's one single point of contact and someone that knows what they're talking about. You need to create a plan with solid research, making sure that you're trying to go after business investment that makes sense for your community. Gathering accurate and up-to-date data, making it available online as a community profile is a standard way to attract investment. Building an investment attraction team and creating a market plan are all important points to consider. The next part of the handbook talks directly about foreign direct investment, or FDI, and it contains information and data about FDI and the impacts on Canada and Manitoba. Foreign direct investment is defined when a company has controlling interest in a business in another country. FDI can bring in new money, it can bring in new jobs, and more people talk about the new innovation and technologies that FDI can bring into another community. In Canada itself, there was $31.21 billion of FDI into Canada. It actually declined significantly from over $55 billion of investment into Canada in 2014. Some research suggests that the digital economy is having more and more of an impact on FDI because companies can sell and communicate with their customers without the need for physical infrastructure in another country. That is having a huge impact on FDI. The handbook talks about the different types of foreign direct investment. One of them is called greenfield investment, and this is where a foreign company comes in and sets up a whole new facility in a community. And brownfield investment, and this is where a company will lease or purchase an existing facility, and this is often called mergers and acquisitions, or M&A. And so the majority of, now this is for people that like acronyms, the majority of FDA is within M&A. So if you know what that means, then you've been listening really well to this morning. So the majority of foreign direct investment is from companies that are doing mergers and acquisitions. And again, as I mentioned before, both have declined in recent years in Canada, although the predictions from the foreign direct investment folks are that it will even out or even grow in the next few years. Now, who are the companies that invest in Canada? The US is our primary person or country that invests into Canada. At 47.5% of all the greenfield investment comes from the US. This has declined significantly since 2015. And then the last four countries, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Switzerland, and the UK, are the next in the top 5. So those are countries that invest in greenfield development into Canada. And what is that greenfield development? Primarily it's manufacturing. 33% of new foreign facilities are within the manufacturing sector. 19% within warehouse and distributions, 11% within data centers, 8% call centers, and research and development is 8%. Now, for the bad news, Manitoba ranks only 24th out of 26 groups that this particular research looked at in attracting greenfield investment in 2016. And this is out of 16 advanced countries and 10 provinces. The provinces that rank the highest in FDI are Ontario, BC, and Quebec. But Manitoba does a really good job of attracting people. And so that may be where the difference is. But I think the question that we all have to ask ourselves is, what is the optimum amount of foreign direct investment in the province? What ranking should we be trying to strive for? And one of the cautions is that we know that profits leave the province when there's foreign control or foreign direct investment, but we still know that Canada needs to improve its position. So that brings me to the next section of the book on site selectors. Site selectors are people who find and analyze potential sites for foreign direct investment. A site selector would be the person, if a business is looking to invest in another country, it would be the site selector's job to find the appropriate locations for those businesses. There's a good resource called the Site Selectors Guild, and they have lots of information and data on site selection and trends. And I thought some of the interesting trends from their 2016 report were that data centers will be a global growth area. Manufacturing and distribution still show growth. And that projects will increase from Germany and China, especially. And I just heard something on the radio this morning, our prime minister in China, so I guess maybe that is a trend. And that labor skills, even though quality of life is becoming more important, labor skills, the cost, and infrastructure capabilities are still the three most critical factors for site selectors. The different site selection stages include the preliminary research site, and at this stage you don't even know that you're being looked at. The next stage is called the community approach, where the site selector will contact someone in the region or the province to request more detailed information. Then the next site is that the site selectors will narrow down the options, and at this stage they will likely require more detailed site-specific information, and then the choice is made. So why do businesses relocate? Why do businesses move? The primary reasons are for high taxes in whatever country they're in, or excessive government regulations, the labor costs, labor availability, they don't have the infrastructure that they're needed, or there might be quality of life concerns. So that's what the research has shown as some of the main reasons why businesses will relocate. And in closing, I think I've got some advice for rural and northern communities. Be prepared for any type of investment. Even if foreign direct investment is something that you're not even interested in, you can prepare your community for any investment by making a plan, getting a team together, making sure you've got good data for your community, that you've got information about your community online, and that you have a single point of contact that is someone who is professional and able to handle requests. Consider economic gardening as a strategy, and that is when you provide support for existing businesses to grow. And also support for entrepreneurs and new business startups is also a really important strategy to consider for communities. Another point that I wanted to make is that regulations and rules for setting up businesses in First Nations or Northern Affairs communities depend a lot on the individual community. Some communities may need council approvals, band council approval, and things like that. So there's a fellow in Thompson, his name is Alvin Murdoch, and he works for Northern Affairs communities. So if you've got information on setting up businesses in northern communities or Northern Affairs communities, Alvin would be a great contact. And other than that, I would suggest that you would need to contact individual First Nations communities to make sure that you understand their rules and regulations for setting up business there. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me now. My name is Richard Pauls. Thanks, Megan, for the introduction and the opportunity to talk with you this morning. I want to spend a few moments and talk with you about integral strategy and what we do and how we do it. So I want to talk a little bit about who we are and what we do, particularly as it relates to economic development strategies. A lot of what Ruth has already shared with you, you'll hear later on in our presentation or my presentation this morning, but I want to spend a little bit of time and talk about the Integral Strategy Network and what we do to actually help communities and groups rethink strategy and unleash the potential that they have within their communities. So we actually tackle wicked problems with you. And by wicked problems, I mean problems that are very complex. They're typically very large. There's an awful lot of what we call moving parts, and there's really no single solution. Economic development is very much a wicked problem. And we tackle those wicked problems with our community, and we actually change the way that people work together. We do that by engaging the entire system, creating shared purpose amongst our groups, unleashing their potential, enhancing the creative dialogue amongst those players.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so I was talking about the way we actually work with communities to change the way that people work together. We engage the entire system. We create shared purpose amongst those players. We help them enhance their creative dialogue. We maintain a focus on outcomes, which is really important because those are what's measurable. We actually help people increase their collaboration. People talk about collaboration, but we actually have a way of increasing the trust, bridging gaps, and making sure that folks actually learn to work together and actually do it. We unleash the potential. It's amazing the potential that's available in your communities, particularly from a regional approach, and the best way to unleash that is to actually harness it. And to do that, we need to define a shared plan of action, and we need to create a learning organization. And I say organization, but this applies equally in a community or across a variety of communities. So people working together need to learn how to work together. We've applied this methodology in a host of settings, ranging from very large systems like active and sustainable school transportation, to food security, to economic development, cancer research, community development, education, energy, the environment, healthcare, information management, intelligent communities, which is a very topical conversation going on right now across Canada, learning disabilities, social innovation at educational institutions, and a provincial strategy for wellness in a Western Canadian province. So this applies equally well in small or large communities. And again, when I say communities, I mean a system of actors playing together and working together. So what's the process that we use? Well, we actually understand and believe that strategy is really about who we are and how we act in the world. Typically, strategy has been done in the past in the back room, and we don't believe that that's the most effective way to do that any longer. We believe that people need to co-create it together. It's theirs. They have to do it together because there's no other way that they will understand it and actually implement it properly. You all know, and we all know, that every community has goals and aspirations, and it looks very much like the penny jar that you see. It's there, it's not organized, and it's a bit of a mess, but there's lots of stuff there. What we do is we actually help create a system where those dots are connected. And so we work together to understand how each successive action will contribute to the outcome necessary to ultimately achieve the strategic goal that you've set for yourselves. It's about connecting the dots, as you see. As we connect those dots, capabilities emerge. We don't know what those capabilities are when we start off, but as we have the conversation and as we dialogue with each other, we understand what those capabilities begin to become. And that's really important because ultimately, at the end of the day, we all need capabilities to define and then deliver the actions that we need to undertake. They're typically driven by the outcomes that we're looking for. We start with outcomes in mind, and in order to achieve an outcome, we have to undertake an action. What is that action? What are those systems of actions? If we can do all that work, if we define the outcomes we're looking for, and we can define the actions that will deliver those outcomes, we can actually understand and measure the impacts that we will have in a greater society. If we achieve our goal, what are the impacts that people will notice, and what will they ultimately care about? Will we create more jobs? Will we have a better quality of life? Will we attract more investment? That's really the impact that we're looking for, and the outcomes need to do that. So it's not a binder or a series of binders like it used to be in days gone by. It's in fact a strategy roadmap, which is a single strategy that's visualized on a single page. And it has everything that's necessary to actually deliver on the strategic goal, and more importantly, the impacts and outcomes that you're looking for in the broader system. It's done over a series of 4 half-day workshops. It's not a lot of time required. It typically takes about 3 months to do. We start in a very simple way. It's very confusing. If you look on the left-hand side of your screen, it's very uncertain and very unclear. And as we go up the S-curve, all of those 4 half-day workshops, it gets very sharply focused. The strategy roadmaps you see on the right-hand side of your screen are for the entire Alberta health system. And it was very complex in the beginning. And as we worked our way up, by the end of the 4th workshop, we had a very full system map of everything that they needed to do in the Alberta health system, all in 4 half days. And when it's done, the map actually belongs to the community that created it. Remember, it's not us that's creating it, it's you guys. And as you do it, you actually begin to own it. It's really important. The strategy represents a shared vision of outcomes that need to be achieved. It aligns the stakeholders based on that shared purpose, and it helps define a very clear and specific strategic goal. It also shows how that goal will be realized, and it identifies the impacts and benefits that society, those folks that care and invest in us, will actually see and realize. Shared action is really important. No good having a strategy if you can't actually do it. So it's about setting priorities, deciding where to invest your time and energy, agreeing on who's accountable for what, understanding and then managing the risks that you're going to face, coordinating all of that stakeholder effort. It's a team sport, remember, and focusing on results. Ultimately, you need to learn by doing, and it's really important to celebrate success because that's what the public sees. It's important. Stakeholders will contribute, and they will do it based on their interest, expertise, and ability to commit resources. We're not all equal. We're not all the same. We don't all have the same resource pool. So the benefit of working this way is it allows people to contribute where they can and where they're able to. And everybody's on the same page, and they're all working towards the same goal. That's what's really important. So I have a couple of community examples where this process was used in economic and community development strategies. I want to remind you of some of the comments before I get to these that Ruth made, and that is that it is about bringing your community together, and it is about focusing on what's important and what you need to do. And sometimes it's not FDI. Sometimes it is economic gardening, and sometimes it is business retention and expansion. And you'll see that reflected in both of these strategies. Both of them, though, were set out to become an investment attraction strategy for their regions. So I want to start first with the city of Wetaskiwin. Wetaskiwin's strategy was designed and developed by 4 communities. There was the city of Wetaskiwin, the county, the town of Millet, and the Hobbema, which is now called Maskwacis First Nation in eastern central Alberta. They had a wide perception of decay issues in their community. They didn't see an awful lot of evidence of growth over a 10-year period, and consequently they set up a full-time economic development department to do this work, and they thought that economic development strategy was important. And so they started off with a very significant public input process where they asked all of the community, well, what's really important to you? What is it you really want to see? And this is the goal they selected for themselves. Wetaskiwin provides economic growth a high quality of life, and advantages for future generations. Not too dissimilar to what I think any of your communities would want to have. It sounds very straightforward, right? The public input process identified a number of significant areas of concern, which actually get into the community development world as opposed to business investment attraction. They were not ready to attract investment. They did not have what they felt was an appropriate community setting that would attract business investment in a successful way. The business community expressed a significant amount of dissatisfaction with previous processes, and they legitimately demanded, a real role in the development of the strategy. So businesses in the Wetaskiwin region made the case that they were the ones that were creating the job, and the role of the city was to ensure that they were open for business, and when the businesses came to City Hall, that they received that type of a reception. Elected officials in Wetaskiwin, to their credit, agreed to implement the business developed solutions. So the businesses worked with the public. This is their strategy roadmap. You'll see economic development in the lower right-hand corner. There's a relationship with the First Nation. Vision and leadership was a real key component. Celebration and communication, community engagement, and community image. These are the capabilities that the Wetaskiwin region felt they needed to create so that they could have an effective strategy that will deliver that goal. The high quality of life for their future generations, if you recall. So what were the outcomes and the lessons? So the strategy roadmap was developed largely by industry, but with substantial community input. So that's part of harnessing the resources at your disposal. That's really what that was about. City administration and one elected official participated to ensure that there was ongoing continuity and that ultimately the city's open for business was actually delivered. Local First Nation participated to a degree that they were able. Again, everybody participates to the degree that they can. They selected priorities. I think Ruth also said earlier that you can't do everything at once, so you need to pick some battles and you need to actually work on those and get them done. So the businesses actually selected the priorities, and the city followed through and implemented the top 3 priorities. They didn't want to take on too much at once, because, as you know, if you try to do everything, it'll all fail. So they were quite successful. The Leduc-Nisku Economic Development Authority was another business investment attraction strategy, and they felt that they needed to bring the region together. Ruth also stressed that regional strategies and regional approaches to regional economic development are looked upon much more favorably. You have a lot more assets and benefits available to you, and community that presents itself as a part of a bigger region has a lot more to offer to businesses. So their goal was that the region had greater influence, regional development is more effective, business investment is increased, and a community of communities is created to take advantage of regional strengths and preserve unique community identities. So they didn't want to be a melting pot. They wanted to preserve that unique identity, and they approached it as a regional strategy. It's early recognition of significant duplication that could be eliminated. Lots of regional efforts were already underway that could be substantially leveraged, and individual community voices were not being heard sufficiently. So they wanted to fix all of those things at the same time. They had a number of communities that participated, including 4 mayors and reeves that actually worked through this process with us and built their strategy roadmap. They had significant direct industry participation. Again, they brought all of their resources together to do this. They had economic developers from all of the communities that had them. Regional chambers of commerce participated, and they recognized that together they could be faster, stronger, and more influential. They knew ultimately at the end of the day that they would be able to accomplish much more when they work together. So, you know, the words collaboration and work together, they're easy to say. They're really not easy to do, though. This is their strategy roadmap. Again, business development was talked about by Ruth. Business climate, Wetaskiwin learned that lesson, as did Leduc-Nisku. Business attraction, so that was the business investment that they were worried about. Regional identities was important. Capacity to actually do the work, leadership, planning and performance, and regional influence. These were all capabilities that this group of communities felt were important for their strategy. So what were their outcomes and their lessons? Well, they learned that the regional approach with the division of effort and responsibility was really important, and it actually worked for them. They believed and still believe that they have a much greater voice because of their regional influence. There were a number of formalized cost revenue sharing relationships amongst communities that were formed as a result, a direct result of this participation in this process. They learned to trust each other and felt that shared efforts would accomplish more in a shorter period of time. And success didn't mean that everything had to locate in the city. Success actually meant sometimes it was better if the investment or the growth in a business happened outside of the city, but the regional spin-off benefited everybody. So that's what they learned. And that's how we believe Integral Strategy Network helps communities come together and define a very effective shared plan for working together, and actually prepares communities for business growth, business investment, and business attraction. So thanks very much. It's been a real pleasure to be able to speak with you today. And I think now at this point, Megan, I'll unshare my screen so that you can take over and we'll deal with some questions. How does that sound?
Perfect. Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome.
We have our question. So this is for Richard. What are the steps towards starting an integral strategy for small communities?
So small communities have an interesting challenge. The first challenge is to understand how big a bite do you want to take. And Ruth spoke and I spoke quite a lot about bringing a regional approach to what you do. And so defining who that region is or what that region is usually the first step, because often a small community, as Ruth mentioned and I mentioned, doesn't have what's needed to carry everything forward. So defining who you are and who you want to participate with and collaborate with is the logical first step for us.
We have another question, and it's, what would be a cost of preparing the roadmap for regional excellence economic development?
So the cost of preparing this work, it's all effort-based, and of course it'll depend on how big the effort is, but it typically runs between $60,000 and $80,000 over a 4-month period.
Okay, and what are your suggestions about where to begin when you have a community and rural region with declining population and are not active in economic development or do not have dedicated resources?
Okay, well, why don't I take a shot at that? I mean, when we started working with Wetaskiwin, they had witnessed some signals of decay and felt that they needed to do something about that. And at that time, they did not have dedicated people working on economic development. So it was part-time, off the side of somebody's desk. They had a couple of volunteers that were working, generally speaking, on an ad hoc voluntary basis. And they felt, the community felt, the city felt that this was not appropriate. And they were in the process of forming dedicated staff resources to take care of that were funded by the region. So they approached all 4 of the players that I mentioned earlier to actually fund the development of a staff position to deal with some of these challenges. And that person that they had indicated they wanted to hire said, well, I'd be interested in undertaking this work, but only if we had a community strategy first. So that was the impetus for the strategy roadmap process for them.
I could probably add to that. I think it's really important for community leadership. It doesn't have to necessarily be municipal or community councils that take the lead. It can be an individual, any individual in a community, but there needs to be some kind of leadership in the community to start the whole process. Eventually, you need to get the municipal and council support on board for any kind of economic development. It's really important to have that local government support before anything is done. And the next thing I would suggest is once you've got that leadership that it starts the process, Yeah, I think Richard is absolutely correct. You've got to start with some kind of plan. And then the important thing, once you get that plan, is to show some quick wins, I think, to get that community support rolling with some quick wins. And those quick wins don't have to be expensive or
and they don't have to
require a
be,
lot of resources. It can be really simple things, hosting an event or sprucing up your main street. Like there's lots of things that you can choose to get things rolling in a small community.
and they don't have to be huge wins either. The first
Right.
win that Wetaskiwin selected that they wanted to demonstrate to the community they were actually moving was actually dealing with the graffiti on the downtown businesses. Little tiny thing, people got a paintbrush and went and painted over it. And that was a quick win, and they celebrated that.
Okay, and I have a question for both of you. Is there any examples of regional approaches, primarily small communities partnering, that were successful in attracting business investment?
There's a group out of Neepawa that includes some communities, and I don't want to name them because I'll miss some out, but there are some communities, Neepawa, along that number 16 highway that are working together right now on developing an investment attraction. They feel that they've got enough infrastructure, labor, and opportunities for businesses. So they're proactively going after. I know the Beausejour area, Anna, I believe, is on this webinar as well, and their region is also really working hard on attracting business investment. So there's some good examples of ongoing work that's happening in Manitoba in small communities.
And I have many examples of smaller communities, but they're all primarily in Alberta, which is where I've done most of my work. And you know, when I speak of small communities, some of the work that we've done in a regional economic development setting is with communities of about 2,000 people, and they typically would work together with a county, which in Manitoba would be an RM, and so they would have a couple of communities and a couple of counties, and they're actually creating business investment, and it's not all inward investment. It's business expansion, it's business startups. These things are creating a lot of jobs in a lot of smaller communities in Alberta. And it's typically because they're adopting a regional approach to it.
And we have another question, and this one's from Kimberly, and she's looking to start a transit system in the PA, OCN, and RM of Kelsey. And there are three main stakeholders in the community. What are your suggestions to make this a reality?
Yeah, that's a very laudable goal. Is it Kelsey?
Kimberly.
Kimberly. There's a number of examples in Alberta that have regional transit systems that came as a direct result of a community development strategy. I can put you in contact with a couple of them through emails later if you like. But it really was all about getting the community bought into the notion of a regional transportation system. So demonstrating the need and demonstrating the viability and starting small is how they actually approached it. And
I would probably suggest that you would need a feasibility study to take to the councils to make sure you get their support for an initiative like that. It sounds like a interesting undertaking.
I'll give it a minute to see if there's any more questions before I give my abuse. Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, I would like to thank our presenters, Ruth Mealy and Richard Pauls, for their great presentations, and as well as our audience for the participation and their questions.